In the heart of one of China's poorest provinces, Guizhou, a staggering revelation has emerged. 7 high-ranking officials each amassed illicit fortunes of up to hundreds of millions of yuan. Despite years of Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign, these cases expose the deep-rooted and persistent corruption within the CCP's ranks. With trials spanning from 2019 to 2024, involving officials at the provincial ministerial level and above, Guizhou's so-called poverty alleviation efforts stand in stark contrast to the greed and lavish lifestyles of its corrupt leaders. Adding to this story is the term average embezzlement per person, which went viral at the end of 2023. This twisted statistic masks the depths of corruption within the party, turning innocent citizens into unwilling accomplices in a narrative designed to sanitize the CCP's reputation on the world stage. As more corrupt officials are exposed, the CCP's desperate attempts to normalize these scandals only further reveal the moral decay at its core. It's all covered in today's China Truths. China's poorest province produces 7 corrupt officials, each with hundreds of millions of yuan. Let's take an overview of the 7 corrupt officials involved in embezzlement scandals in Guizhou. First, Sun Jigang, former secretary of the Guizhou Provincial Party Committee, accumulated 813 million yuan, roughly $113.7 million USD. His bribery case was heard by the Tianjin No. 2 Intermediate People's Court on August 14, 2024. Second, Wang Fuyu, former chairman of the Guizhou Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC, garnered 450 million yuan, about $62.9 million USD. He was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for bribery by the Tianjin No. 1 Intermediate People's Court on January 17, 2022. Third, Li Ziyong, former vice chairman of the Guizhou CPPCC, obtained 432 million yuan, approximately $60.4 million USD. On August 13, 2024, the Chongqing No. 5 Intermediate People's Court sentenced him to death with a 2-year reprieve for bribery and abuse of power. Fourth, Wang Xiaoguang, former vice governor of Guizhou, had illicit gains of 210 million yuan, around $29.4 million USD. The Chongqing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court sentenced him to 20 years in prison for bribery, embezzlement, and insider trading on April 23, 2019, along with a fine of 173 million yuan, about $24.2 million USD. Fifth, Zhou Jianquan, former vice chairman of the Guizhou CPPCC, collected 108 million yuan, roughly $15.1 million USD. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for bribery by the Chongqing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court on March 26, 2024. Sixth, Yuan Ringhua, former chairman of Mutai Group, received 112.9 million yuan, about $15.8 million USD. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for bribery by the Guiyang Intermediate People's Court on September 23, 2021. Seventh, Gao Weidong, former director of the Guizhou Coalfield Geology Bureau, acquired 110 million yuan, approximately $15.4 million USD. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for bribery by the Lipanshui Intermediate People's Court on February 2, 2024, for common traits of the 7 billion yuan corrupt officials. First, the corruption of these officials spanned many years, all beginning during Jiang Zemin's tenure. Despite Xi Jinping launching an anti-corruption campaign in 2013, propaganda, legal measures, and psychological tactics had no real deterrent effect. Publicly, they supported Xi's anti-corruption efforts, while secretly continuing their corrupt practices. Second, the more corrupt they became, the more they were promoted to higher and more influential positions. Each promotion was based on assessments by the CCP's organizational departments. When promoted to the deputy provincial ministerial level or higher, they were vetted by the Central Organization Department, which consistently deemed them good party cadres. Third, before their eventual downfall, almost all CCP supervisory mechanisms proved ineffective. These mechanisms include internal party supervision, administrative oversight, supervision by the National People's Congress, Democratic Party supervision, audit supervision, anti-corruption bureau oversight, media scrutiny, petition channels, and public monitoring. Yet, until these officials were formally investigated, these oversight mechanisms were almost entirely ineffective. Fourth, none of these officials cared about the hardships faced by Guizhou's impoverished population. Guizhou has the largest number of impoverished people, the deepest level of poverty, and the widest range of poverty in China. In November 2020, when Sun Jigang was the secretary of the Guizhou Provincial Party Committee, he declared that Guizhou had been lifted out of poverty. However, Sun Jigang's embezzlement of 813 million yuan and the reckless pursuit of costly political achievement projects by Guizhou officials, leading to a severe debt crisis, clearly show that the claim of poverty alleviation in Guizhou is entirely false. On June 14, 2019, Sun Jigang stated during a warning education activity, "The people hate corruption the most, and corruption is the greatest threat facing our party." The corruption cases of Wang Xiaoguang and others remind us that strict governance of the party is a never-ending process. Despite these words, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, CCDI, reported that he used his power for personal gain, including assisting his son's business activities and engaging in large-scale money collection. Former Deputy Secretary of the Guizhou Provincial Party Committee and Chairman of the Guizhou CPPCC, Wang Fuyu, lived a life of luxury despite the widespread poverty in Guizhou. He arranged for homes to be purchased and lavishly renovated in Sanya for winters, Guiyang for summers, and Shenzhen for spring and autumn, funded by bribes. An avid golfer, Fuyu played from Hainan to Guizhou throughout his career and into retirement, often traveling on private jets arranged by business owners to play across the country. Wang Fuyu became so addicted to taking bribes that after being arrested, he said, "I don't even know what I needed the money for. I had no worries about food or drink. What would I need the money for? To bury me. Now I realize that my insatiable greed was extreme, but I don't even know what I wanted the money for." Following his arrest, Wang Xiaoguang, Guizhou's vice-governor, was found to have hoarded more than 4,000 bottles of Mutai liquor, which he admitted to disposing of by pouring down the drain, revealing a total stash that exceeded 8,000 bottles. At that time, his wife lamented, "We can't throw it all away, can't drink it all, can't give it all away, and can't pour it all out." In March 2022, details of the bribery case involving Yuan Renghua, former chairman of Mutai Group, were publicized. Since 2004, his family's illegal sales of Mutai liquor netted more than 230 million yuan in profits, about $32.18 million US. Over 40 investigators spent a full day and night counting 1,588 items seized from Yuan Renghua's home, including gold products, watches, jewelry, calligraphy and paintings, rare items such as ivory, as well as cash in RMB, USD, GBP, and other currencies. The CCDI reported that Zhou Jianquan exploited poverty alleviation projects for personal gain, held shares in unlisted companies illegally, and engaged in power for sex transactions, reflecting a pattern of systemic corruption. Gao Weidong, who indulged in vices such as drinking, gambling, and prostitution, admitted to accepting money without limits and enjoyed competing with businessmen in luxury spending. Li Ziyong, during his tenure as the leader of Lipanshui City, accumulated over 150 billion yuan in new debt for costly political achievement projects. After being arrested, Li Ziyong said, "If I had to repay the money I borrowed, I definitely wouldn't have borrowed it. But since the government has to repay it, I went ahead and borrowed it. Anyway, after a few years, I'll switch positions and leave without a trace." Executed cases. On January 16, 1995, Yan Jianhong, the wife of former Guizhou Provincial Party Committee Secretary Liu Zhengwei and chairman of the Guizhou Provincial International Trust and Investment Corporation, was executed due to embezzlement. Following Yan Jianhong's execution, her successor, Xiang Mingshu, committed to learning from her mistakes, vowing never to repeat them. Yet, just over a year later, on February 29, 1996, Xiang Mingshu was imprisoned. Liu Fangren, who took over from Liu Zhengwei as secretary of the Guizhou Provincial Party Committee from 1993 to 2001, was sentenced to life in prison in 2004 due to his greed and lascivious behavior. Despite the severe punishments, including executions, these measures failed to deter the corrupt desires for wealth and pleasure among Guizhou's officials. The 7 billion yuan corrupt officials mentioned have been investigated, yet it is likely that many others remain unexposed. Given the existing cadre selection and supervision mechanisms within the CCP, the downfall of this group of billion yuan corrupt officials is expected to lead to the emergence of a new batch. This growing cycle of corruption has even led to absurd metrics aimed at normalizing the situation. CCP's shameless new metric, per capita corruption. Author Jean Yu recently posted an article on the Epoch Times titled CCP's shameless new metric, per capita corruption. According to Jean Yu, at the end of 2023, a netizen shared a new term they'd come across, average embezzlement per person, along with a screenshot. Shortly after, a report calculating the average embezzlement per person across various provinces and cities in China went viral, sparking widespread debate online. The report used data from the past 5 years on official crimes, as disclosed in the reports of the Supreme People's Court and the Supreme People's Procuratorate, and calculated the average embezzlement per person by population ratios. It then compared this to the average disposable income, showing that in some areas, the average embezzlement per person actually exceeded the annual income of local residents. According to this report, the top 10 most corrupt regions in China are Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, Chongqing, Hebei, Shanxi, Liaoning, Jilin, Heilongjiang, and Inner Mongolia. In these areas, the average embezzlement per person exceeds 10,000 yuan, nearly $1,400, with Beijing leading the pack at 25,000 yuan, about $3,500, equivalent to 1.5 times the annual income of local residents. Nationally, the average embezzlement level is 4,000 yuan, about $560, per person, less than 1/6 of Beijing's. Jean Yu wrote that it's honestly hard to find words to express how shameless the CCP and these so-called experts are. CCP 50 Cent Army argues, beware of Western influencers using isolated cases of large-scale corruption to smear us. In reality, our average embezzlement per person is among the lowest globally. What a shameless concept, average embezzlement per person. In China, 1.13 billion people still struggle just to get by, agonizing over whether to add an egg or a bit of meat to their meals, burdened by the daily grind of survival. So many live in utter poverty, in homes that can't even keep out the wind and rain, if you can even call them homes. Yet somehow, they're being assigned a share of this average embezzlement per person. The people aren't just human resources or chives ready to be harvested anymore, they've now become dilution agents for the embezzled wealth of corrupt officials. This average embezzlement statistic is trying to paint CCP officials as some of the cleanest in the world, even claiming China belongs among the ranks of anti-corruption nations. Aren't these CCP officials ashamed? Are they just isolated cases of massive corruption? Do they not feel wronged for being overlooked? Or did the CCP's 50 Cent Army simply miss their extraordinary skill at large-scale embezzlement? This concept of average embezzlement per person could only be a product of socialism with Chinese characteristics, something so unique and unparalleled that it stands out on the world stage, a bizarre achievement, no doubt the result of a new type of productive force. People joke that their high incomes have been dragged down by our poverty, like we've been averaged into their salaries, creating these so-called average wages and average incomes. Now, even our innocence has been stained, as we're slapped with a new label, average embezzlement per person, forcing 1.4 billion people to carry the blame for CCP corruption. What's next? Average ghost employee pay, average public fund misappropriation, average public spending abuse, average number of mistresses, etc. In this country of socialism with Chinese characteristics, the list of unique features goes on and on, from food safety and environmental pollution to healthcare, education, finance, law enforcement, construction, agriculture, and more. These sectors are saturated with CCP characteristics: the chained woman, missing persons, brain death, organ harvesting, rat heads, duck necks, runaway scandals, red codes, and landslides caused by 2 millimeters of rain in supposedly high-quality construction projects. Just open your eyes, and you'll see it all around us, happening to our classmates, colleagues, neighbors, relatives, and friends. During this trash time, the CCP coined a new term, average embezzlement per person, and came up with a new metric, average embezzlement per person amount. From now on, the public has another purpose, sharing the blame and dispersing the responsibility for corruption. Meanwhile, CCP officials can continue embezzling without a care, further exploiting the people. It's clear that during this trash time, the CCP can only produce loathsome terms as it finds itself cornered with no options left, resorting to harshly suppressing the people, seizing assets, and clinging to control over the internet in a desperate attempt to stay afloat. The CCP is the root of all suffering for the Chinese people. Only when it collapses can the Chinese people live a life of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, free from fear. But a better life won't just come on its own. Freedom, democracy, and the rule of law are always fought for. The CCP is already in its trash time, so let's start resisting bit by bit, mocking it, and abandoning it. For those working in special departments like cybersecurity, the police, and the military, remember, we are all sons, daughters, spouses, parents, ordinary people. Think about the kind of lives your relatives and friends are living. For a century, the CCP has brought endless suffering to the Chinese people. Now that the CCP's end is near, do you really want to keep defending it? Is it worth it? Protecting the CCP means condemning yourself and your descendants to lives of poverty, harvested as human resources. Author Jean Yu concluded, please wake up, see the CCP's evil nature for what it is, and distance yourself from it. Save yourself and help save others. Don't forget to leave a comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from China Truths.